Farmers today are facing rising costs, volatile markets, and extreme weather. The Better Way to Farm podcast digs into strategies to help you take control of farm inputs and maximize profit so your farm can thrive for generations. Remember to take advantage of our free resources at abetterwaytofarm.com. Now, from America's Heartland, here's your host.
Hey guys, Rod here at A Better Way to Farm, where we improve yields and increase profits, and we are on day 3 of our 12 days of nutrients. We're very excited to get to come to you here and share some things. I am really excited. The whole deal with potassium, the more I study it, the more I look at it, the more I do, the better it becomes, and the more I see ways for farmers to make money when they really sit down and study this and understand it. And I think, guys, it's one of the things I love so much about our fundamentals of agronomy is that we take time and we dive into the nutrients and we talk about how to best manage them and how to take and do the things that we need to do so that we can make the most profit. And tonight there's a lot of information in here. I'm super excited to share it with you. I'm going to start, like always, with Karen said, how long have we been doing that? And I said, I don't know, but I do know this. I have a paper that I printed off on the 14th day of December of 2016. So I would say this is at least the 9th year in a row that we have done this. And I have kept this. A lot of the things I don't, but this is a sheet that talks about the role of the essential nutrients in crop development. And so as they're talking in here, one of the things I want to understand is that we're going to be doing magnesium somewhere here in the near future. And when we do, it's going to tie in closely. And you're going to hear a bunch of stuff about magnesium tonight. And some of that will be recovered when we do magnesium. The fact is that there is a lot of correlation there, a lot of things to learn as we start studying. Potassium, carbohydrate metabolism, breaking down in the translocation of starches. It's responsible for increasing photosynthesis. It has a lot to do with water use efficiency. It's essential for protein synthesis. It's very important in fruit formation. It activates enzymes and controls their reaction rates. It improves the quality of seeds and fruits, and it increases disease resistance. Those are things that we have known for a really long time, that it is really important as a way to help control disease, to help that plant stay healthier. I went on, and you guys can go online. I went to Cultivase, and I found one of the Molder's balls, and you can get these anywhere off of the internet. But it's always interesting to me to see those things which are antagonistic and those things which are stimulating. In other words, something that's a stimulant would increase the need of a nutrient by the plant because of the increase in the level of another, whereas an antagonism would decrease the availability in the plant because of the action of another. And as you start looking at these, the big thing here about potassium is nitrogen is antagonistic. And we know, we talked about this when we did nitrogen, that too much nitrogen, the overuse of nitrogen, means we have to overuse potassium. Not a good idea. We also know that the overuse of phosphate is antagonistic, and it makes us need to apply more and extra potash. One of the reasons that I worry about the guys using a lot of manure and getting that way up and getting that too high is when we see that happen, then all of a sudden we have a K problem. We also know that magnesium and potassium have a love-hate relationship. They're antagonistic both directions. Too much K and not enough mag, you got a mag deficiency and you're trouble, you got to apply mag. And it doesn't matter how high your levels are, it's about the ratio, okay? And too much mag and not enough K, that's a problem. Now, you've got it here at my own farm, that's our problem. We have way too much magnesium in our soil, just naturally occurring. And so we have to really lay the K to it to make it work. But we're not going out and broadcasting vast amounts of K. And I'm going to talk about why we don't do that later here. What we're going to do is spend some time saying, okay, what's the right way to put that on? And high K starter is our friend. And that's one of the things that we do. We know that putting on a lot of potassium will increase the need for iron. We know that putting on a lot of potassium will increase the need for manganese. And so Molder's ball is something that should be looked at, studied, and internalized. And before I dive into the books, there's a couple things I want to do. Number one, you guys know I'm a fan of Midwest Labs. I appreciate their handbook. We're going to talk about that here just in a little bit. But they have something called the Table of Ratings. It's also known as Table 167. And you go to midwestlabs.com/resources-guides for a complete list of all of the resources that they have. And the reason that the table of ratings is so important is because there's so much to learn. Now, in the table of ratings, when it talks about phosphorus, when it talks about zinc and copper and manganese and those things, there's just a chart. If you have a P1 of 25, then you're at this level. If you have a P1 of 50, you're at this level. It has nothing to do with the CEC because those are anions. However, with your cation, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and so on, the level is dependent upon your CEC. This is important, guys, and you may want to catch this part of this video multiple times because I really think that there are people out here who are being sold a bill of goods. Let me explain. If you have a CEC of 15, and a lot of us are farming soils with CECs 12 to 15, but let's pretend it's at 15, and you have a K level, a potassium level of 151 parts per million, you are considered in the medium range. But if you have a CEC of 30 and you have a potassium level of 151, now you went from the high range, 152, a CEC of 15 and a reading of 152 on K parts per million is high. A CEC of 30 and a reading of 152 is low. So what does that mean? That means people in this business are going to come to you and they're going to say, man, look at this, you're low. This is coming back low. Well, it is if you have a CEC of 30, and this is why you need to see your own soil test, because oftentimes this part of this chart that has the CEC on it gets covered up. And all they're doing is they're using this bottom line here. They took off the CEC and they just show you the bottom line, and it says, hey, if you've got actually at 30, if you have 188 parts per million, you're considered to be low. Now, let's flip that over. If you have a CEC of 10 and you get to 159, you're considered to be very high. Guys, if you have questions on this, I want you to reach out. We're going to talk about this. We're going to do a Fundamentals of Agronomy Thursday and Friday, and then we're going to do 2 of them next week, and we're going to do 2 of them the week after that. So it's a busy time. It's about 3,000 miles standing between me and Christmas, and so these will not happen every day. The 12 days of nutrients will be sporadic when I'm home and I can get here into the office or upstairs into the living room. We're going to do some of the 12 days of nutrients. But if you have questions about this chart, I would love to talk to you. When I meet you at the Fundamentals of Agronomy, let's talk about it. Let's go through it and see how it can be utilized to make you more money and be smart in how we're spending our fertility dollars. One of the things that you know is that if you watch me present at the Fundamentals of Agronomy, I put a cartoon up. And basically, it says that the potassium chloride product is a product of the devil. And it's a tongue-in-cheek, it's a fun thing. Don't get all freaked out on me here, but I kind of believe that. And the reason is that potassium chloride can be converted to chlorine gas. It's not always common, but here's the problem with it. Potassium chloride, when that chloride flips over and becomes chlorine, and we're going to talk more about this later, but it becomes a very heavy gas. It's a poison, and it's heavier than air. It's heavier than atmosphere. So what happens is, in the event that the chloride becomes chlorine, the chlorine lays close to the ground and poisons our plants. Okay? Why do we want to take that chance? There's a lot of reasons that if we're going to use potassium chloride, it needs to be fall applied. And we're going to talk about that in an article from the University of Minnesota here. But I just want you guys to understand that can happen. It does happen. And we want to make sure that we're not feeding that monster to poison our own soils. One of the things that I read was that in the context of soil, aluminum's primary effect is not directly related to chloride, but rather to soil acidity and its impact on plant growth. When aluminum and chloride can exist, while aluminum and chloride can exist in the soil, the interaction is not a primary driver of soil chemistry. However, aluminum is going to increase the acidity, and as that becomes more acidic, then that aluminum becomes more soluble and more available getting into the plant growth. And all of a sudden, we've got that coming in there working against us, and then we can come in with aluminum toxicity, and now we add chloride. When we add chloride, while present in the soil, it's not directly linked to the toxicity. However, it should be a concern in certain soil types, especially when present in high concentrations. And so when we get these two things working together and working against us, it doesn't work very well. You hear me say all the time, life's real simple. Figure out how it works and get on the right side of it. Applying a lot of aluminum and a lot of chloride is probably not how you're going to get to that point. I had some stuff here that I pulled off, and this was put out on a blog news thing from the extension at the University of Minnesota. I read a lot of their stuff, a lot of interesting things to study and learn and look at. And what they had done here, and I'm going to share this for you because this is important stuff. While many growers opt for a P and K application in the fall, applying any fertilizer months ahead can present some risk for lessening the availability as it has more time to react with the soil. Past research has shown that the spring application of phosphorus results in higher corn yields compared to fall application. What happens? We put that phosphorus on, we give it 6 months to react with all of the things that are in the soil, and it gets tied up. Again, back to the aluminum. For soybeans, however, the fall application of potassium out-yielded the spring application in all 4 places that they studied this, and where the time of application significantly differed. The decrease in soybean yield was expected, as past research has shown that chloride in the KCl or potash can negatively affect soybean yield. One goal of this project was to see if the fall application could reduce the uptake of chloride by the soybean, as chloride anions move into the plant as it takes up water and it is not very well regulated. If chloride is present, the soybean plant will take it up. Plant tissue tests have shown significant less chloride in the plant tissue when KCl is applied in the fall. Therefore, those applying potash ahead of soybeans should avoid a spring application, as this can reduce the risk from any potential yield loss due to excessive uptake of chloride by the soybean plant. And he went on, the author of this study said, I would still recommend not applying more than 100 pounds of KCl per acre in front of the crop. Guys, that's straight out of the university up there talking about that. And then it went on with some more of the study and talking about, is the timing important? And this is about a 6 or 8 page synopsis of that, which I'm not going to go through, but I would encourage you, go to the University of Minnesota and check out their blog site and see what you can learn on that. But guys, spring applied KCl, especially in front of soybeans, not your friend. Not your friend at all, and we don't want to be doing that. I have some work here that was done at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. Big shout out to all my Husker buddies. Probably I enjoyed the bowl game on Black Friday more than you did, but hey, we're still friends, right? So as we go through here and we look at this, one of the things that they did was they talked about the uptake of nutrients to get different yield goals. Again, if you have questions on this, I want you to reach out. Send Karen a text at 641-919-5570 and say, hey, I'd like to talk about that study from UNL. But here's the thing. The uptake of phosphorus is one thing, but the uptake of K is completely different. So at their study, if they wanted to grow 175 bushel corn, they needed to take up about 0.95, almost 1 pound of K had to go into the plant for each bushel of corn. If they move that yield from 175 up to 257, that's a 50% increase in yield, right? But the K uptake went from 0.95 to 1.75. That, ladies and gentlemen, is like an 85 or 90% increase. It takes the curve for K uptake following yield is very steep and continues to rise and get steeper. The kicker on the deal, the K removal rate really didn't change. If they had 175 bushel corn, it took 0.21 pounds out the gate. If they had 257 bushel yield, it took 0.22. There was 1/100th of a pound difference in the removal rate. What did that mean? That means that those high yields, at that 257 bushel yield, what was left behind? For every bushel of grain that you took out the gate, you left 1.53 pounds of K in the stover. And guys, we're going to tie this all together, but leaving that 1.53 pounds of K in that stover is why we want to get that stuff to recycle very quickly. That is why it ties together with why deep roots are so important, because we pull K up from down 6, 7, 8, 9 feet, and we put it in the residue and we recycle it up there in that plow layer. Guys, that's how things work, and this is how we're going to get on the right side of it. And this is good work that was done. I just really enjoy reading this. I'm not going to go through the whole study. There is a bunch of it here, and I just wanted to share those things with you as we get in. And again, if you want to reach out, we will get you some more information on all of that as you want us to. We would welcome that opportunity to visit with you. Now, I want to get into my books and start talking about some of the things here that we have. And I'm going to start with my old standby, the Agronomy Handbook from Midwest Labs, and see what they've got in here that's of value to us in regards to looking at potassium. They talk about potassium being in 3 basic categories. Relatively unavailable is the first one, and that would be 90 to 98% of all the K in your soil is unavailable potassium. Then they talk about number 2 being slowly available potassium. This form is dissolved from primary minerals or potassium fertilizer, and it's attached to the surface of the organic matter and the clay minerals in between the layers of the clay minerals, where it is only released by weathering. This would make up about 1 to 10% of the K in your soil. Readily available potassium. This is the form that's held by your organic matter, and it's on the edges of the clay mineral layers. It's already dissolved in the soil. So it may also be present in the already dissolved in soil solution form where it's taken up by the plants. And this typically, guys, is 0.1%, maybe up to 2% if you're really, really lucky. And so we know that there's a lot of K in the soil, and we want to make sure that we're doing what we can in order to make that stuff come out, be available, and let us use it. I get into my other standby, the old fertilizer handbook from the Fertilizer Institute. I appreciate this book a great deal. As you can see, it's chewed up, it's ate up, it's been dropped and kicked, and pages are bent, and it's marked up 19 different ways from Sunday, but there is so much information in here that we really appreciate. In regards to potassium, they talk about the fact that again, same sign as the Midwest book, the amount of potassium in the soil solution is a very small portion of the available potassium. Hydrogen and other cations displace the changeable potassium from the colloidal surfaces in the soil solution where it's absorbed by the roots. Only about 1 to maybe 2% of the potassium is extractable. And so we are painfully aware of what we cannot get. Clay fixation lowers the availability of applied potassium. In other words, what we spread very quickly becomes tied up with the clay and it gets attached there. And so even putting it on doesn't get it. You guys know that Dr. Mulvaney, if you want to hear something, go get the podcast and go in and look at the ones with Dr. Mulvaney. There are several where we took a look at nitrogen and we took a look at potassium. But the potassium paradox is probably my favorite. And he talks about sometimes the more K you put on, the less available K you end up with. That is a statistical fact. The fixation process is actually a physical entrapment of potassium ions between 2 adjacent plates of the clay colloids, and this fixed potassium is considered to be slowly available by the plants. Guys, why is it that when it gets dry, the first nutrient that starts to show up as deficient in the tissue test is K? The answer, because your soil is like an accordion. When it's moist, it expands. When it's dry, it shrinks down. And when it gets tight, when it gets tighter and tighter, less and less of that K can come out. Remember how we get our nutrients? Roots go down, hair roots go out in between the soil colloids, right? They exude an acid. That acid picks up and is drawn back in, and it removes those nutrients and pulls them back into the plant. The tighter those get, the less the hair roots can get in there, the less distance they grow, the less K is available. And so when we get into that drought situation and that ground sucks down like an accordion coming back together, that's when we end up with a deficiency just created purely by the drought. And so knowing that, other things that we do that compact that soil likewise reduce the amount of potassium that we can get. I like this little old Midwestern handbook. One of the things that I like is they talk about what do your deficiencies look like of each nutrient. Symptoms of a potassium deficient plant. Number 1, the plant grows slowly. Number 2, the margins of the leaves get a scorched effect, starting with the older leaves. I'm going to come back to that. The stalk is weak and the plants lodge or fall over easy. Seed or fruit is shriveled up, and the plant resistance to rusts, are you listening? Guys, this book is not new, okay? The third printing was in 1973. The first edition came out in 1953. So from 1953, 1973, whatever you want to look at, this baby's 50 years old plus. And they knew 50 years ago that the plant's resistance to rusts and other diseases is reduced. How many people this year got bit by southern rust? Guys, we saw people get absolutely creamed by it. Do I think you can replace fungicide with a nutrient package? Probably not. Do I think having the healthiest plant around makes you the least susceptible to the disease? Yes, I do. Beyond the shadow of a doubt. And we know that. I want to talk a little bit about these symptoms, and one of them being the scorched effect. Part of the problem in agriculture is when we see yellow in a plant, especially a corn plant, what do? Oh man, nitrogen. Doesn't matter where it is, doesn't matter what it looks like, it's yellow, we need nitrogen. That's not true. Guys, here's the deal. If we have yellowing at the bottom of the plant and it's in a V working its way down, that's probably nitrogen. If we have yellowing at the top of the plant and the whole leaf is turning yellow, that's probably sulfur. If we have yellow at the top of the plant and it's yellow intervenal striping, that's probably manganese. If we have yellow at the bottom of the plant and it's intervenal striping, that's probably magnesium. And if we have yellow around the edges of the plant and they actually look like they're scorched and burnt and dying off, that's probably potassium. Yellow doesn't mean nitrogen, guys. Yellow should mean caution, just like the stoplight. It means caution. It means we need to know what those are and work into it and figure out what the right things to do are. I love this Anatomy of Life and Energy in Agriculture by Arden B. Anderson. And in here he talks about the fact that potassium is normally referred to in reference of potash, or K2O, next to nitrogen. It is probably the most misused, overused, and abused element in ag. It is very profitable for the industry. Its basic function is determine the caliber or thickness of the stalk and leaves, the fruit size, and the number of fruit in that set. Used in excess, potassium will replace calcium in a cell wall structure, resulting in diseased cells. Too much K results in diseased cells. A sure indicator of potash excess is the occurrence of black spots on the leaves. Modern ag has become addicted to nitrogen and potash, and like any drug addiction, the requirement for the drug increases constantly. What it took to get you high yesterday won't do it tomorrow. It'll take a little bit more and a little bit more. The farmers are told that in order to get more yield, they have to add more nitrogen, add more potash, and as the soil degenerates, it requires more of this drug just to sustain its crop yield. Potash has a place in crop production, but it must be used in balance with other nutrients. I talked about this when I did nitrogen. There was a newsletter put out by someone, and they talked about the fact that they were encouraging their people to use more nitrogen. And then you went back off of the first page onto the third or fourth or fifth page, and it said, and using a lot more nitrogen would increase the need for potassium, so you would need to put more potassium on. I'm not sure with the markets that we have and the prices of the inputs that we have that applying excess anything is a good idea. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go on the record and say we need to be figuring out how to put on exactly what we need that's going to get us the most return for our money. And that's probably not the overuse of nitrogen and potassium. Working out of Neil's book, Hands-On Agronomy, muriate of potash or potassium chloride are basically the same, whether it's the red 0060 or the white 0062. If the pH is 6.5, it is possible to build the K level a little. If the pH is 6.6, this product will not build potassium very much, if any. At a pH of 6.7, there is not much chance to build the level at all, and at 6.8, there will be no buildup of the sample depth, even though 2,000 pounds are applied to each acre over a 5-year period. They're talking about putting 400 pounds of K on 5 years in a row and not building the levels. This would probably run counter to some of the things that you've been told. There simply is no place for that potassium to attach to the soil colloid. If you have a pH above 6.5, very few negative places remain. Therefore, the potassium cannot find enough sites, push hydrogen out of the way, and attach to the soil colloid. And so what they're saying is the build program here probably isn't going to happen in that situation. Now, he would say that the average Midwest soil, if you measure every bit of potassium in it, will have 30 to 50,000 pounds in the top 7 inches. Guys, 30 to 50,000 pounds. That's a lot. 25 tons in the top 7 inches. It's usually in the wrong form for the plant to use, and if the soil can be managed to turn loose some of this mother load of nutrients in very small amounts over a period of time, it is possible to go a long time without potassium inputs. We can take off crop after crop without running out of potassium. The key is to get microbial activity going in the soil. Guys, we're hearing a lot about studying carbon, managing carbon, raising your carbon score, if you will. But let's talk about what are the things that you do to improve that. Number one, softer chemistry. Anything we can do to get the microbial activity going, it's a snowball. It's the same thing as always. Figure out how life works, get on the right side of it. Softer chemistry is easier on the microbes. More microbes do the right thing and make things break down in the soil. More microbes you end up with more humus. More humus feeds more microbes. This isn't really rocket science here. It's just a matter of doing the things that we need to do. And there's a lot of people pushing that whole idea, trying to make it seem like it's really something that's like far out, really groovy, and you've got to do all these things to get it. Guys, increasing your carbon score is a result of doing things correctly. What about just using good cover crops? Yeah, that'd probably help. There are a lot of things that we can do to increase that. And using the right potassium or not putting any on might be one of those things. Potassium is called a freelancer in the plants because it doesn't actually form any compounds. An interesting paragraph here. Here's the dilemma. We can only put 90 pounds of potassium on at a time, and yet an 8-ton alfalfa crop takes 440 pounds. Some of the universities have had farmers put on as much as 350 or 400 pounds of potash in a given year. And yet those growers who listen to academia will only build the potassium up when the pH is below 6.5. It's the only time they build it. On soils with a higher pH, the alfalfa will not benefit from all that extra potassium if it applied all at once. Keep in mind, though the reserves of potassium may be huge in your soil, don't count your chickens before they hatch. Always supply what the Albrecht model will show to be needed for the next crop, even if unavailable potassium can eventually be released. Oftentimes it's not in time. Once the soil tests reveal you have enough to properly grow the next crop, then you should consider skipping a potassium application. Potassium is vital for photosynthesis. It's essential in protein synthesis. It improves water use efficiency. We've talked about that. And we fight these droughts every year that at some point in time we have a dry, miserable stretch, and this helps it. There's a saying that potassium is the poor man's irrigation. It improves yield and increases crop quality and reduces disease. Another guy who's talking about the fact that we can help cut down on disease by doing the right things. Potassium gets around in water and finally gets trapped in between the soil colloids, and it can't get loose until something is done to change that chemistry. In that form, it's unavailable to the plant because the soil colloid has trapped the potassium. That is why whenever magnesium gets higher and higher, the soil gets tighter and tighter, and potassium availability gets lower and lower. We've talked about this, guys. Compaction is not your friend. As you bring your mag level down, the soil loosens up, and you can actually release potassium trapped in between those soil particles. Potassium moves out into the water and then onto the soil colloid. As you bring the mag down, it makes more sites available on the clay for the potassium to attach. The potassium then becomes available in the soil water and freed from the colloid to feed the plant. In the presence of ammonium nitrogen, there will be a problem with microbial fixation and the attachment to the soil colloid. The higher the nitrogen, the more potassium it will take to do the same job. Have you heard that once before? The higher the nitrogen, the more potassium it's going to take to do the same job. Keep in mind, even if you put on the right amount of K, manganese and copper deficiencies will still get you lodging. We want to make sure we're addressing those. We'll talk about those later. Potassium is the first key for stock strength, but the crop also has to have enough copper and manganese in order to make it work. Also, there's a relationship between sodium and potassium, and for those of you with high sodium soils, you need to pay attention to this. It's only between sodium and potassium. It doesn't have to do with any other minerals. When that base saturation of those two together add up to more than 10%, the plant is not going to get as much manganese. It is simply a matter of the 10% saturation of potassium and sodium blocking manganese uptake from the roots. So it's very important that you pay attention to those. Anytime you have sodium in a field and the percentage of saturation of sodium is higher than the percentage of saturation of potassium, you already have trouble if you experience heat and humidity at the same time. But the day that the percentage of sodium exceeds the percentage of potassium in the soil, now adequate potassium will stop getting in and sodium is incorporated into the cell walls instead. As long as it stays nice and cool, everything works fine. Or if the humidity is low, it's no problem. But if you have high sodium, higher than your potassium on base saturation, and it gets hot and it gets humid, you're going to have a monster of a problem. And the last thing that Neil says about this here, not the last thing he says, last thing I'm going to share with you is this uptake. I want to get back into this, guys. In the first 25 days of the life of a corn plant, it takes 19 pounds of nitrogen to grow. We're going to use all 180 bushel. That's when this work was done. So in the first 25 days, 180 bushel crop will take in 19 pounds of nitrogen. In the first 25 days, 180 bushel corn crop will take in 4 pounds of phosphorus. You heard me talk about this. We need phosphorus early for root development, beyond the shadow of a doubt. But we only need 4 pounds. In the first 25 days, it will take in 22 pounds of potassium. It takes 5 times as much K in the first 25 days as it does phosphorus. In the next 25 days, by day 50, the plant will take up 103 pounds of nitrogen. It will take up 22 pounds of phosphorus, and it will take 126 pounds of potassium. It takes more potassium into the plant than it does nitrogen to get the yield. Guys, this is really, really big. But going out and just blowing and going with a huge amount of potassium is not the answer. We've got to get it in there in a form that can get into that plant. We've got to get it in there in a form that the plant takes it up. That's why row-placed high K starters are your friend. We know that K will not become available until that temperature gets up to about a 70-degree soil temperature. We're not going to have that. Probably some of you, not even in the first 50 days. It'll be later than day 50. And if that's one of the things that's holding us back. The more K we can force feed in, that's why we're going to put some down in the band. If guys are doing in furrow and they're doing 2x2, we'll put some extra potassium sulfate there. And then it's not a bad thing to come back and foliar feed, hit it with one more shot, if that's what it takes to make the whole world go round and get it into there. And last but not least, from Donald Schrieffer, From the Soil Up, we're looking at what he has to say about potassium. And he says, keep in mind, 0060 is a salt. It is potassium chloride. The K will adhere to the negative particle, and the chlorine should leach out and combine with calcium to form calcium chloride or road salt. That's the best. That's what you're hoping for. There's a product called potassium sulfate, K2SO4, and it has 50% potassium and 17% sulfur. If you're going to broadcast, guys, you know I'm not a fan of broadcast, but if you are, using potassium sulfate is your friend. Yeah, it's going to cost twice as much. Put half as much on. Don't take my word for it. Go split a field. Do half of it with potassium chloride. Do half of it with potassium sulfate. Do it for 3 or 4 years in a row and watch what happens. I'm not going to have an argument about it. I just want you to test it and try it and show yourself. Potassium sulfate is quite a bit more expensive until you figure out the value of the sulfur. And so it's very important to use the right product as we go through here. Potassium, again, its functions producing and regulating activities of 40 or more enzymes. It's responsible for cell wall strength, which gives us resistance to disease and lodging. It increases oxygen intake through the stomata, which increases photosynthesis, and increases the production of sugars, facilitating the movement of those sugars and starches to the sites of need. And sugar movement is important to get grain fill and to prevent a backlogging in the chloroplast, which cause a reduction in photosynthesis. It plays an important role in the conversion of nitrogen into protein and thereby reducing non-protein nitrogen. It reduces respiration, which gives us more energy for production. And by the way, when we reduce respiration, we take and we lose less water So that helps us by improving drought resistant, which is the next thing that he lists there. He talks about the different ones that are there, the unavailable potassium. We talked about that earlier. The slowly available and the clay particles, again, they're like tiny accordions. They expand and they contract as they gain and lose water. And then he talks about the readily available, which we already went into and shared with you guys. He goes on to say that the timing of application is really important in low CEC soils. If you want to do high yields, you're going to have to apply more potassium than the soils can hold, so it should be done in the spring rather than the fall to shorten leaching time. Now, the problem with that is we know that on soybeans, when we apply it in the spring, we're hurting the yield because the chloride goes into the plant. And so that's kind of runs counter to what we want to do there. Banding is always superior to broadcasting on low CE soils. We think it's superior on everything. Surface banding of a cation would not be done on a clay soil because it would not penetrate sufficiently into the root zone. I had a guy, I've got a call again tomorrow. He sent me his deal over his strip till. He's got 2 tubes coming out right on top of the ground. And there are people in his head getting in his ears saying, doesn't make any difference, just put the nutrients on there and let them be. Guys, if you're going to use our product, I don't want you to do it that way. I would rather you not buy anything from us than put P and K on top of the soil. It's not going to move down. And all that you do is you put a lot on the surface and get no response to it, and we don't want that. Soil magnesium levels must be checked in making potassium recommendations. High potash applications that are marginal in magnesium will cause a magnesium deficiency in the crop. And likewise, if we have too much magnesium, then we have another problem trying to get enough K into the crop as well. Dr. Mulvaney would tell you that in the top 6 feet of soil, now we read earlier in the top 7 inches, there's 25 tons of K. In the top 6 feet, he would say there's somewhere between 360,000 pounds and 480,000 pounds. I did a video from a root pit a year and a half ago, and the guy said that Mulvaney was wrong and that I was spewing forth things that weren't true. He said there's only 40,000 pounds of K in the top 6 feet. And I just said, okay, are you listening to you? 40,000 pounds is enough if we can figure out how to get it to cut loose. And guys, that comes from doing the right thing. That comes from using softer chemistry fertilizer. That comes from doing the things that do improve your carbon score. That comes from doing the things that increase biological activity in that soil. And we're going to talk about how to increase that biological activity. And one of the things is a proper use of micronutrients. It's amazing to me, the people who come in this industry and tell you, you've got to put on a lot of NPK, 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 you're going to mine your soils. And when you say, what about zinc and copper and manganese and magnesium? Well, no, those are fine. Oh, so we've put on P and K every year since grandpa started farming, okay, or in your case, maybe your great-grandpa or your great-great-grandpa, but we haven't put on any micronutrients or any secondaries. And yet the only thing you're worried about mining is the P and the K. You know, it takes a lot of sulfur, it takes a lot of magnesium, a lot of zinc, a lot of manganese. All of those are essential nutrients. And when we don't address those, that's where the chain breaks. That's where we get the low volume of yield because we're not addressing the limiting factor. Guys, it's interesting to me. I have a good friend out in Kansas who I appreciate very much. And today I was talking to him and he ordered some starter fertilizer. And even though he has high K levels, we went with a high K starter because multiple people that we work with in Nebraska, Kansas, all these places where they have high potassium levels, when they study it, the extra $5 an acre that it takes to move to the higher K results in 5 to 7 to 10 bushel. I think everybody here is saying, how can I spend $5 and get 7 bushel of corn? Even at $4, that's $28 an acre, $23 net. Those are the things. It's how do we pick up $20 an acre here, $20 an acre there, $12 an acre here, and 6 over there. And all of a sudden, we've just picked up the difference between losing money and making money in 2026. Guys, I love this topic. I am so excited to get to share this with you, and I hope that you found great value in it. If there's things we can do, if you want to talk more, reach out. Someone from the team will get a hold of you. If you'd like to go to one of the 2-day fundamentals of agronomy, we would love to meet you there. We'd love the chance to get together and work together. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you have a really great Christmas sweater that you love. I happen to have about 15 or 20 of them. I'll be sporting a different one each and every day on the 12 days of nutrients. and we may come back in and do a wrap up. We'll see how we get along here. But guys, I just want you to know how much we appreciate you. I really hope that you can remember the reason for the season, and I hope you have the merriest of Christmases. And as always, we are really hoping that you're having a better day.